A rich lawyer tried to flex his power on my business, so I hit him where it cost the most. Power reveals itself in small moments, not in courtrooms or headlines, but in how people treat you when they think they're untouchable. I run a physical therapy clinic. Nothing flashy, no marble floors or dramatic signage, just a clean space, good staff, and a reputation built the slow, boring way, by actually helping people get better. It took years to get here. Long days, insurance headaches, payroll stress, equipment repairs that always seem to break at the worst possible time. Owning a healthcare business isn't glamorous, but it's honest work, and it pays well enough if you're disciplined. My fiancé is a lawyer, a successful one. Big firm, high billables, the kind of job where people lean in when you say what you do for a living. We keep our finances mostly separate, but together we're comfortable. Not billionaire rich, but squarely in the category where money stops being a daily worry. That difference matters, because people treat her profession with reverence. They treat mine like a favor. A few months after we got engaged, we threw a small engagement party. Friends, family, and some of her colleagues. Wine, laughter, the usual networking disguised as celebration. At some point in the evening, someone asked what I did. When I told them, a few of her coworkers lit up. "Oh, really? I've been meaning to see someone for my shoulder. My back's been killing me since trial season." I smiled and said what I always say. "If you ever come by the clinic, I'm happy to give you a discount." 4 of them took me up on it. They became regulars. Polite, grateful, paid on time, referred friends. Exactly the kind of clients small businesses survive on. Then there was him, one of my fiancé's partners. Let's call him Mark. Mark booked an appointment a few weeks later. I'd heard about him before he ever walked through my door. No one liked him. Not her, not her coworkers, not even, from what I gathered, his own staff. He was brilliant, and he made sure everyone knew it. From the moment he arrived, he talked down to me, questioned my credentials, asked how long I'd been practicing as if he expected the answer to disappoint him, corrected my terminology incorrectly, and smirked when I didn't rise to it. I stayed professional because arrogance doesn't scare me, desperation does. And Mark reeked of it. After the session, he asked about the discount. I smiled sweetly. "It's for employees," I said. "There are 4. I let the silence hang just long enough. He paid full price. He came back, again and again. Each visit, the same energy. Condescending, performative, needing to feel important in a room where money didn't automatically make him king. 3 weeks ago, he came in while one of my therapists was out sick. I was busier than usual, juggling patients, paperwork, and staff schedules. He noticed. "That must be annoying," he said. I nodded. "It happens." He leaned back and asked casually whether my employee needed a doctor's note. I laughed, lightly, and said no. I think that's a stupid policy. If someone's sick, I want them home, not infecting the clinic. His expression shifted. He said he was thinking of being more strict at his firm, that people took advantage, that structure was necessary to prevent laziness. I filed that comment away, because people who talk like that don't believe rules apply to them, only to others. A few days later, I caught a brutal cold. Then I passed it to my fiancé. It hit her hard. By Friday, she worked from home. Over the weekend, she got worse. Monday morning, she took the day off. That's when the email came. From Mark. She needed a doctor's note. It was the first time that policy had ever been enforced. Coincidentally, Mark had a 2 p.m. appointment with me that very day. And that's when I realized something important. Power doesn't disappear when you leave the office. It just changes shape. And money is only leverage if you know how to use it.
The thing about rules is that they only feel fair when you think they'll never be used against you. I didn't call Mark immediately. I didn't text him. I didn't warn him. Instead, I opened my calendar and did something that felt almost too simple. I booked my fiancé a doctor's appointment. 2 p.m., the exact time Mark was scheduled to see me. Not because I needed the appointment urgently, but because if policies mattered so much to him, then following them precisely was the most respectful thing I could do. I emailed him shortly after. Short, professional, polite. Hi, Mark. I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel your 2 o'clock appointment today. My fiance has a doctor's visit at that time, and I'll need to drive her. I'll reach out if I have any availability soon. I hit send and went back to work. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Is this really necessary? He wrote. I didn't respond, because necessity had nothing to do with it. My schedule was full, truly full, 3 weeks booked solid. People in pain don't wait politely for convenience. They take the first slot they can get. And today, that slot belonged to my fiance. Another message came in. I can move things around. We don't need to be dramatic. I smiled. Drama is what people call consequences when they're not used to them. I replied carefully. I understand. Unfortunately, I don't have availability for the next 3 weeks. That's when the tone changed. He messaged both of us. Suddenly, the doctor's note wasn't necessary anymore. It was a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, flexible. My fiancé responded before I could. She said canceling last minute violated the clinic's policy, that it would be rude to the doctor, that she couldn't do that. I added one line. It's best that she go anyway. Silence. For an hour. Then the messages stopped. When 2 o'clock came and went, I drove my fiancé to her appointment. We sat in the waiting room quietly, not celebrating, not laughing, just calm, because something bigger was happening. The next morning, Mark canceled all future appointments. No explanation, no apology. A week later, one of my fiancé's coworkers pulled her aside. Apparently, Mark had been furious, not because of the money, because of the loss of control. He'd been forced to accommodate a rule he himself enforced, and it had cost him time, discomfort, and embarrassment. He'd had to explain to partners why he missed meetings, why he was working remotely again, why a policy he pushed suddenly worked against him, and all over a doctor's note. The clinic lost a client, but here's the part that matters financially. We gained something far more valuable: reputation. Word spread quietly that my clinic didn't bend for titles, that discounts weren't entitlements, that rules applied evenly. New clients came in, better ones, people who respected boundaries, people who paid without arguing, people who referred friends without expecting favors. Mark stopped making policy changes after that. Funny how expensive lessons stick better than arguments. But I wasn't done thinking about it, because the real revenge wasn't the cancellation. It was the realization that financial power isn't always about charging more. Sometimes it's about refusing to discount your dignity.
I thought it was over. Mark canceled his appointments, the clinic moved on, life returned to its familiar rhythm of insurance claims, treatment plans, and small victories when someone finally walked without pain. But people like Mark don't let go quietly. They don't apologize. They reframe. About 2 weeks after the cancellation, my fiancé came home with a look I recognized immediately. The tight jaw, the controlled breathing. Mark had spoken. Not to me, about me. At a firm meeting, he'd made a casual remark. Nothing explicit, just enough to plant doubt. He questioned whether it was appropriate for his partner's business to offer selective discounts, wondered aloud if that created ethical gray areas, suggested it might be unprofessional. He didn't accuse, he implied. And implication is a lawyer's favorite weapon. My fiancé shut it down immediately, told him the clinic's policies were transparent and legal, that discounts were discretionary, that the doctor's note policy was his own creation. That should have ended it. It didn't, because Mark wasn't trying to win an argument. He was trying to restore hierarchy. The following week, 2 scheduled referrals from the firm canceled. No explanation, just gone. It wasn't a coincidence. I could feel the old reflex kicking in, the urge to smooth things over, to reach out, to explain, to preserve the relationship for business reasons. That reflex is expensive, so I didn't act on it. Instead, I did something far more effective. I ran the numbers. Those referrals accounted for less than 3% of our monthly revenue. Nice to have, not essential. And more importantly, they came with expectations: last-minute scheduling, complaints about billing, entitlement to discounts, low-margin clients in high-status clothing. I made a decision. We updated our intake policy. Nothing dramatic, nothing personal, just clarity. No professional discounts without written agreement, no exceptions to cancellation policies, payment due at time of service, respectful conduct required. And we communicated it to everyone. Clients adapted. The right ones stayed. A few weeks later, Mark showed up at the clinic unannounced, no appointment. He stood at the front desk smiling like nothing had happened. "I just wanted to clear the air," he said, loudly enough for others to hear. I stepped out of my office and met him there. We spoke calmly, professionally. He apologized, sort of, said things had been misunderstood, that work stress had gotten to him, that he hoped we could move forward. Then he asked if I could make room for him again. I told him the truth. We were fully booked, and even if we weren't, his conduct violated our client standards. The smile cracked, just slightly. He nodded, said he understood, and left. A week later, we gained 3 new long-term clients, all referrals, not from the firm, from people who heard we didn't tolerate nonsense. Here's the part no one tells you about power plays. The moment you stop chasing approval, you start attracting respect. Mark never came back, but his influence didn't matter anymore. Our revenue increased that quarter, not dramatically, steadily, healthily, the kind of growth built on consistency, not compromise. My fiancé's firm eventually rolled back the strict doctor's note policy, quietly. No announcement, no apology, just gone. And I realized something important. Mark's greatest fear wasn't losing money, it was losing authority in rooms where money wasn't the only currency. There's a moment when arrogance stops being irritating and starts becoming expensive. Mark crossed that line quietly, the way most professionals do when they believe they're insulated by status. It started with whispers. One of my regular clients, a paralegal from a different firm, mentioned his name offhand during a session, not in admiration, more like a warning. "People don't like working with him," she said. "They tolerate him because he bills well." That sentence stuck with me, because billing well only protects you for so long. A few weeks later, my fiancée came home later than usual. She didn't say anything at first, just dropped her bag, poured a glass of water, and sat down. Mark had been pulled into a closed-door meeting. One of his associates had filed a formal complaint. Not about harassment, not about discrimination, about retaliation. Apparently, Mark had started enforcing policies selectively, assigning worse cases, denying flexibility, making examples out of people who questioned him. The doctor's note policy was just the beginning. HR had documentation, emails, messages, witness statements. He denied everything, of course, claimed misunderstanding, claimed high expectations, claimed people were too sensitive. But something had changed. Leadership was listening because turnover was rising, and turnover costs money. Clients were starting to notice that familiar faces were disappearing. Deadlines slept, morale dipped. Mark's team, once profitable, started missing targets. That's when leadership did the math. Mark wasn't indispensable. He was a liability. Meanwhile, my clinic kept growing. Nothing explosive, nothing dramatic, just steady referrals, consistent revenue, and a reputation for professionalism that quietly outperformed advertising. We hired another therapist, expanded hours, invested in new equipment without stress. The contrast was surreal. One business grew because it respected people. The other started bleeding because it didn't. Then came the final irony. Mark needed physical therapy again, not with me, with a clinic across town, one that didn't know his reputation, one that didn't enforce boundaries. He complained constantly, missed appointments, argued billing. They dropped him after 3 sessions. That's when word finally caught up to him. Industries talk. Law, healthcare, finance. People notice patterns, and Mark's pattern became clear. Wherever he went, friction followed.
A month later, my fiancé told me he'd been removed from partnership consideration for the next review cycle. No announcement, no drama, just stalled. The kind of career setback that doesn't show up on LinkedIn, but echoes for years. That night, we talked finances, about security, about boundaries, about how power actually works when it's not backed by respect. And I realized something important. Mark never lost because I canceled an appointment. He lost because his behavior finally met resistance. All I did was refuse to absorb the cost of his entitlement. And that refusal, that tiny professional no, rippled outward.
People assume revenge has to be loud, a confrontation, a public collapse, a dramatic final scene. But the most devastating endings happen quietly, when someone realizes the world kept turning without them. By the time I heard what finally happened to Mark, I wasn't waiting for it anymore. That was the biggest difference between us. I had stopped watching him. It came through my fiancée first, late one evening when she closed her laptop and exhaled in a way that felt finished. "He's out," she said. Just 2 words. No build-up, no satisfaction in her voice, just fact. Mark hadn't been fired in the dramatic sense. There was no escort out of the building, no whispered scandals splashed across LinkedIn. Instead, he was transitioned, a carefully worded internal memo, a mutual decision, a generous severance designed to make problems disappear quietly. That's how expensive people are moved, not because they're cruel, but because they're bad for business. The irony was sharp enough to hurt. The man who obsessed over control lost it all because he couldn't understand one basic principle of money. Power only exists where people choose to stay. Clients hadn't stayed. Associates hadn't stayed. Support had quietly evaporated. And once leadership realized replacing him would increase revenue instead of risking it, the decision became easy. Meanwhile, my life had expanded in ways I hadn't even planned. The clinic crossed a threshold that year, the kind you feel before you see on paper. Cash flow stabilized to the point where emergencies stopped being emergencies. I increased staff pay, not as a reward, as a strategy. Turnover costs money. Burnout costs money. Loyalty, when earned, compounds quietly. We introduced corporate wellness packages, partnered with local businesses, built a referral pipeline that didn't depend on discounts or desperation. I wasn't chasing money anymore. I was directing it. One afternoon, weeks after Mark's exit, he came up in conversation again. Someone mentioned he was consulting, that word people use when they don't want to say unemployed. He'd reached out to former contacts, asked for introductions, tried to leverage old authority like it still held weight. It didn't, because authority expires the moment people stop believing in it. And here's the part I didn't expect. He reached out to me. An email. Polite, careful, almost humble. He said he was reflecting on leadership, that he'd made mistakes, that he's seeking guidance from people who had built successful independent practices. I stared at the screen longer than I thought I would, not because I felt tempted, but because I felt clarity. I didn't owe him anything, not advice, not forgiveness, not access. And I realized something important in that moment. Financial freedom gives you the power to decline without guilt. So I did. I replied with one sentence. "I'm focusing on my own growth right now. I wish you the best." No lecture, no dig, no victory lap. Just a closed door. That's the ending people don't talk about. Not the downfall, but the silence after. The moment when someone realizes the systems they relied on no longer protect them, and the people they once controlled don't need them anymore. That's when the lesson hits. Looking back, the doctor's note incident feels small, almost trivial. But it wasn't about the appointment. It was about mindset. Mark believed money flowed from authority. I learned money flows from value. He believed rules were tools for dominance. I learned boundaries were tools for sustainability. He optimized for obedience. I optimized for independence. And only one of those strategies survives long term. If there's one rule that governs every financial decision I make now, it's this. Never build your income on someone else's tolerance for your behavior, because tolerance is temporary, value endures. So if you're listening to this and you feel stuck under someone who mistakes control for leadership, if you're being told to wait your turn while your labor enriches someone else, if you're sacrificing health, time, or dignity for a paycheck that doesn't grow, ask yourself this: are you being paid for your value or for your compliance? Because once you know the difference, everything changes. And if you want more stories like this, real consequences, real money lessons, and the kind of revenge that actually lasts, subscribe, like, and stay with us. The next story starts exactly where comfort ends.